Hey friends, did you know that this week's Torah portion is the longest portion in the entire Torah? It has 176 verses. And they explain that this portion is usually read the first Shabbat after the holiday of Shavuot when we receive the Torah. So therefore we make an effort to show our honor and our love for the Torah by reading an extra long portion in the Torah this Shabbat morning. You know, the following scenario comes to mind. A young boy attending a wedding. He looks around the beautiful wedding hall. He's taking in the scene, and he easily spots the bride. She's wearing her beautiful flowing white gown, but he doesn't know who the groom is because all the men are in the same bow tie and tuxedo. So how do I know which one is the groom? The little boy asks his dad. His father says, why didn't you just wait till the end of the wedding? And the man that you see exiting the hall together with the bride and going home, that's the groom. Friends, on Shavuot, we just sat together in the service in the shul. We were all dressed up for the final occasion of the beautiful holiday to receive the 10 Commandments. But who was really the groom? Who really made that commitment to study the Torah and live by its teachings? So friends, the answer comes this Shabbat. Those who go home with the bride, who come back to the shul, to the services, who continue learning, and who are more than usual because they are inspired by the Shavuot holiday, they are the ones who merit the truly profound connection with the Almighty God. You see, our Torah portion this week is devoted in large part to the dedication of the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the desert. The dedication, offerings, and gifts by the princes, the leaders of the 12 tribes that began on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when the Mishkan, when the tabernacle was finally complete. You see, there are 12 tribes, and every day of these first 12 days of Nisan, a different leader from a different tribe, it was his turn to bring offerings, which was really, they were all brought the same offerings, every tribe, in different gold and silver, etc., but everyone had their own day to bring it. It says on the seventh day, which tribe brought it? It was the leader of the tribe of Ephraim. His name was Elishama. That day was no coincidence that it was Shabbat, because that year, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of Nisan, fell on a Sunday. So the seventh day, when the seventh tribe brought their gift, was the Shabbat. Now the truth is that there are really restrictions on which sacrifices could be brought on Shabbat. Why? Because sacrifices have forbidden labors like slaughtering and skinning the animals and burning parts of the animals upon the altar. And the Torah tells us something very interesting. Certain sacrifices you could bring on Shabbat, even though you are, in a way, transgressing forbidden labors. Why? Because they override the regular laws of Shabbat, but that exception is only limited to communal offerings, like the daily Tamid offering or the Musaf offering. That's what it means. These are offerings that were brought on behalf of the entire nation. Yet, personal offerings, like a donation offering, or if someone made a vow and they had to bring a vow offering, or sin offerings to be forgiven, those are not allowed to be brought on Shabbat. So why was the leader of the tribe of Ephraim, Elishama ben Ammihud, allowed to bring his dedication, his gift, which was like that of the other princes? It was a private offering. Why was he allowed to bring that on Shabbat? It wasn't the communal offering. And the Midrash explains that this is precisely why it had to be that tribe, the tribe of Ephraim, to bring the offering on Shabbat. It was his turn. Because it actually states as follows. Joseph took the initiative and kept the Shabbat before it was given. And it says, by your life, I will repay your grandson, and he will bring the offerings on the Shabbat. Because when individual offerings are not typically brought, your grandson, who seems like an individual offering, I will have him bring that offering on Shabbat. You see, true, personal offerings are not allowed on Shabbat, but since Ephraim was one of the two tribes that descended from Yosef, God made a special exception there. It was a very unique reward, because Yosef kept Shabbat in Egypt hundreds of years before the Torah was given. How do we know Yosef kept Shabbat? Very simple. Because you remember the story, Joseph's brothers came from Israel to Egypt. There was a famine to buy food. And they came with their youngest brother, Benjamin. And Joseph invited them to the palace to have a meal. The Torah states that he said to his butler, "Why don't you slaughter an animal and prepare a delicious meal for them?" And the commentaries explain that, you know what he was telling them? He was saying, prepare food, it's Friday. Prepare in advance of Shabbat a beautiful Shabbat meal, because you can't cook on Shabbat. So just as the verse states regarding the miraculous manna, that it was on the sixth day, as you know, it fell Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but on Friday, on the sixth day, when they had to prepare for Shabbat, they got a double portion. They got the Friday's portion and the Shabbat's portion. So it says, because he kept Shabbat, Joseph kept Shabbat, by preparing for it on Friday, his descendant, who's the leader of the tribe of Ephraim, now when they were bringing gifts at the dedication of the Mishkan, even though it was a personal offering, he was allowed to bring the gift on Shabbat as a reward for his grandfather keeping the Shabbat so many years before. Now, the truth is, it's a bit perplexing, because the truth is, if Joseph honored the Shabbat by keeping it, what kind of reward is this that his grandson is allowed to bring a sacrifice that violates Shabbat? I mean, and even if God made an exception, you know, it was not really allowed. Is that the reward? I mean, Joseph's reward should have been just the opposite. It should have been, because Joseph kept Shabbat before it was given to us, his grandson would not be the one to bring the dedication that day, which looks like desecrating Shabbat. Maybe it should have been another one, another tribe, not Joseph's grandson. Friends, the Rebbe actually addressed these questions on several occasions. And the Rebbe, with dazzling scholarly analysis, taught us such a beautiful meaning of Joseph's commitment and his tremendous strength, illuminating at once both the idea of the individual offering of his grandson, Elishama ben Ammihud, the significance of the actions of every Jew in every generation. And the Rebbe says, when the Medrash tells us that Yosef kept Shabbat, it relates much more than an aspects of Joseph's conduct. It actually captured the way that Yosef viewed himself as an individual, as a person in general. Because the point is, not only that Joseph kept Shabbat, but how he managed to do so. Let's not take for granted that such a busy person like Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, charged with feeding the entire Egyptian nation in a famine and managing all its affairs, he would have found it within himself to shutter his office for an entire day each week to observe a day of rest. Yet, despite all that, he did it. And that's especially remarkable because there was nobody else in the entire land of Egypt to observe Shabbat with him. There was no synagogue, there was no prayer services, nobody to sing the Shabbat songs with him, nobody to make Kiddush with. Yet here's a young man away from his people. He kept Shabbat every bit of devotion as though he was in the most beautiful, large community with hundreds of thousands of people. What inspired him? Because Joseph saw himself not as an individual, but as someone whose actions affected the entire world. If his actions had no effect beyond his own personal life, who knows if Joseph would have remained a religious, God-fearing Jew all alone in Egypt in this exile that he was in. But friends, Joseph understood that if he was in Egypt, you know why he was there? Because God put him in Egypt. And if God put him in Egypt, he has a purpose there. He understood that he was an ambassador of God, a representative of the entire Jewish nations to the depths of the Egyptians' depravity. And therefore, if no one else kept the laws of Shabbat, it was no consequence to him. Because if keeping Shabbat was difficult and it required sacrifice, it didn't faze him. Because he had his eyes on the mission. And the mission involved the destiny of the whole Jewish nation. It wasn't like one man for himself, but one man who weighed his every move by the effect it would have on the course of history in the future. And therefore, friends, you know what? Joseph's reward that his grandson, the leader of Ephraim many years later, was allowed to bring his dedication offering on the Shabbat. We said by the Torah law that what? That community sacrifices could be brought on Shabbat, but not personal offerings, correct? Perhaps, let us say, that his grandson Elishama ben Ammihud, he brought an offering as a donation from his own funds, just like all the other tribal leaders. But for him, a grandson, a descendant of the great Joseph, the righteous man, his offering wasn't a personal offering, but a communal one. Because a leader He might be an individual, but his every actions that he undertakes on behalf of everyone else and is weighed against the need of his people. Because a leader like Joseph doesn't do personal things. And therefore, what may look like a personal offering may be brought on Shabbat because it falls within the exception of communal offerings. Now listen to this. Joseph's inspiration for keeping Shabbat, the weight he felt on his own shoulders of the entire Jewish destiny, was actually the same source that allowed him to pass the most difficult test he endured in his life. When he was a slave in his master's home, and his wife Potiphar tried to seduce Joseph. Here we had a woman with a great deal of power over Joseph. She had all the wealth, all the connections in the world. And if Joseph refused, she had the ability, and ultimately did, make his life miserable. Had he agreed to her plan, he could have had everything. And remember what his position was. He was a young man, and at the age of 17 years old was orphaned from his mother. He was separated from his father. He was ostracized by his brothers. And when he arrived in Egypt, he was alone, friends. Life as he knew it was over. He had every reason to be depressed and down and out. He really had no connection to his previous life. And seemingly no reason even to stay connected to his family. No mother, no father, no siblings who sold him. And if he would have sinned with this woman, Potiphar, it's not like anybody would have known about it. He had no family to bring shame upon. And the sin would have prevented him from being thrown into jail. It would have solved a lot of his problems. So is it possible for someone in such a position not to succumb? Indeed, the Torah tells us that Joseph almost lost that battle. He came within an inch of abandoning it all, grabbing his ticket to freedom. But at the moment of truth, something occurred that shook him to the core, roused him from the depths of where he was about to fall, and caused him to jump and run away like a man possessed, escaping like the one from the plague. And with his coat still hanging, he ran away, and she grabbed his coat. What happened? Where did he get the strength to overcome this moment? And Rashi says, he saw the vision of his father's face. At that crucial moment, he saw Jacob's face, and he knew he had to call it off. Hey, why was his father's face of all things that saved the day? I mean, surely there are plenty of people out there who remember their fathers, who remember all the important morals and lessons that their fathers taught them in their youth, and yet continue to sin without much qualm. Even Esav, his wicked brother, whom we are told who had extraordinary respect for his father Isaac, and who saw Isaac every day, he wasn't deterred from committing every sin in the book whenever his father wasn't looking. Why did this vision of Jacob, what was it that inspired Joseph to do the right move? Friends, in 1960, the Rebbe explained this story based on a curious passage of the Talmud, Baba Basra, page 58b. And it states over there that Jacob's face resembled the face of Adam Arishon, the face of the first man created. And the Rebbe explains this is the key to the story, and the reason it was seeing the visage of his father's face that kept Joseph from sinning. Because when Joseph saw his father's face, you know what he saw? He saw the tragic story of Adam, the first man to live, who committed that first sin with disastrous consequences. He saw Adam's face, and it beckoned Joseph, saying, don't make the mistake that I made. As we know, Adam was committed not to eat from the tree. Likely, he told himself, what does it matter if I take a small bite? After all, it's just me. And in the grand scheme of things, how much do I matter already? But you know and I know, friends, the minute he put that fruit in his mouth, the effect was stronger than 1,000 atom bombs. You know what happened? It was the creation of the evil inclination, the advent of ego and the obsession with self, the invention of death itself. So when Yosef saw the visage of his father's face, at that crucial moment, and it looked like Adam, He remembered what was at stake. He realized there's no such a thing as a personal error. There's no such a thing as an action that begins and ends with me in the here and now. And like in the story of Adam, every decision to act or not to act affects all mankind forever. And Joseph got the message. And that was all he needed to run away from it. Because instead of viewing himself as a poor, abandoned kid, a young man left alone to face temptation, whose actions wouldn't matter to anyone in the world, he saw himself as an agent of the one above, of God, upon whose actions and envious balance the spiritual equilibrium and the integrity of the entire world stands. And as we know, Maimonides states that a person should view the entire world as an equally balance between merit and demerit. And it is your one good deed, your mitzvah, that tips the balance of the entire world to the side of merit and brings deliverance and salvation to himself and to others. Because the deeds of every individual go beyond one personal self. Every deed brings another deed of the same kind. And a person has an effect on his family, his friends, his community, and perhaps without even knowing it, he has an effect upon the entire world. And friends, that's how Joseph overcame the test, the greatest test of his life. And that's how he found the commitment, as the only Jew in Egypt, to keep the Shabbos. What he may have not done for himself, he did for the future of the people of Israel. So his reward, hundreds of years later, was that his grandson, the head of the tribe of Ephraim, his offering in the Mishkan was brought on Shabbat. It was a symbol of the recognition that his personal actions is in fact was on behalf of the entire people of Israel. Friends, I have a friend who's a Chabad rabbi in Anchorage, Alaska, Rabbi Yosef Greenberg. And when he came to Alaska many years ago, he made it his mission to try to find every Jewish family in town, which there aren't many. So one of the methods he used was he went to various local schools to talk about Judaism as a guest speaker. So it was, he arrived one day at a local public school because the idea was he's going to broaden the horizon of the children of the Jewish culture, teaching them about a religion that most of those kids didn't hear much about it. And like this, he was able to find out if there's any Jewish kids in the school. And he says that he walked into a classroom one day, and the curious students gathered around the friendly-looking, bearded fellow, the rabbi, who came to talk to them about this Jewish culture, and it looked like he walked right out of the Bible. I mean, he said to the students, have anyone over here ever met a Jewish person? Expecting a no. But sure enough, one student got up and said, yes, sir, my mom is Jewish. Now, the rabbi knew this was his chance to make a lasting impression upon this young girl. So he said, listen to me. Every Friday, Jewish women and girls around the world light candles before sunset to bring in the Shabbat. And they bring in light and peace into their homes and into the world. So I want to ask you to light a Shabbat candle too. And he said, Alaska is the westernmost place in the world with a Jewish population. And because of that, it's the last place that the Shabbat begins. So I want you to light a candle for Shabbat every week and know that all the Jewish women and girls around the world who have already lit candles from Australia across to Europe and United States all the way to Alaska, they lit candles. But they wait for you to light your candle. Because your candle that you light will close the circle of light and illuminate the entire world. Friends, every deed you do is important for the whole world. We're talking about Joseph, the holy man. But the idea really is relevant to each and every one of us. And if it's something we took on faith in the past, we have learned in the past, just recently, a few years ago, in China, there was a single man the province of Hubei, who went shopping for food one cloudy day in November of 2019. You all know what I'm talking about. This man didn't consider himself unique. He wasn't wealthy, not exceptionally bright. He was an ordinary person like the 60 million other people in the province where he lived, and he was trying to buy food on an ordinary day. And in that region, it included a visit to a wet market where various creatures were caught with wild angle and they were hanging from the ceiling. Yet we know what happened 5 days later. He developed a cough and a fever. And 2 more days passed, and his wife and his children developed the same. And within 2 or 3 months, we all know the entire world shut down. That was COVID-19. Back to the great isolation like it was during the time of the flood of Noah. And likely the world changed forever. This was a modern incarnation, I can say, in the extreme of the butterfly effect. Even if in my own eyes I might be small, I might seem like an ordinary person, not some kind of great leader or influencer like Joseph. I want you to know, my friends, that in God's eyes, we are all important. And we all have a role to play in the destiny of our people. And there has never been, and there will never be another you who in your own unique way can bring salvation to the entire world. To some extent, we are all Yosef in Egypt. Because the world is filled with pitfalls and challenges. And it's easy to think that we as an individual don't matter at all that much in the grand scheme of things. But friends, the truth is otherwise. Every individual matters. Every deed matters. Not only to yourself, but to your family, to your friends, to the community, and to the entire world. So I bless you, and I bless myself and us all, that we merit to keep our heads high with this knowledge, and pass every test with flying colors, and soon merit the time when we will be tested no longer. With the coming of Mashiach, may it happen speedily in our days. Amen.